Welcome to the Fall 2023 Parsons Communication Design Lecture Series. My name is Elaine Lopez, and I'm the Associate Director of the Communication Design BFA program. The CD Lecture Series allows students to meet design thinkers and practitioners within the discipline and adjacent fields. You can learn more about upcoming lectures on the CD app and watch past lectures on our YouTube channel. Our next and last lecture will feature Kiel Muchenhaus on Wednesday, November 29th at 10:30 a.m. in this auditorium. I'm thrilled to announce today's speakers, Reggie James and Luca Repola. Reggie James is the co-founder and CEO of Eternal. Eternal is a new media company building a 3D radio platform and a slate of original programming. Reggie comes from a New York family but grew up in the Poconos. He considers himself a writer, product architect, DJ, and plus. All right, cool. His most recent talks include Embracing Irrelevancy for Progress at FWB Fest and This Could Be a Movement, Why Mars Needs a Creative Director at the Long Now Foundation. He writes appropriately consistently on his Substack, Product Lost. Luca Repola is a native New Yorker and founder and chief creative officer of Eternal. After attending the New School, he established his own creative media studio where he developed media strategies and produced work for world-class brands like HBO, Dior, DKNY, Paper Magazine, Away, and more. In 2021, Luca and his co-founder Reggie James received the Forbes 30 Under 30 selection for social media alongside Emma Chamberlain, Mr. Beast, and Addison Rae. Today, Luca sits at the forefront of Eternal's media and culture, developing the brand and producing notorious underground events in New York City. On weekends, you can find Luca DJing at Public Records, Elsewhere, Paragon, The Lot Radio, or basically anywhere in New York City with CDJs. Welcome, Reggie and Luca.
Okay. I'm very excited to be at Parsons. I feel like maybe I should have went to school here, but we'll kind of release that chip on the shoulder for another day. The title of this talk is Feel Everything. We're going to go through a series of probes and ideally a little something to walk away with how we might sort of change the conditions of the environment we find ourselves in. So I think, immediately I love giving a subtitle, subtext to a broad sort of abstract title, and thinking a lot about sort of what our generation kind of gets afforded to us. I think something that is consistent across generations is this idea of environment. And so your environment kind of becomes the background of the forming of your intuitions. And from those intuitions, we go on to build what become the next generation's environment. And we can kind of look at both, the long tail of history as well as sort of critiques on current product and culture in this light. But a little bit about us and why we got asked to speak. So, you heard our bios, but Luca and I were introduced to each other through a mutual friend, Cami, who is the founder and CEO of Parade, the underwear startup. And knowing very little about each other, he flew me out to LA where he was living at the time, and I slept on his couch. And we just kind of went really deep for a week, talking about how we viewed sort of the next iterations of online identity and what that could mean. And now that I think about it, I think this might be our 5-year anniversary of having first talked to each other, because it was around this time, a little bit before Thanksgiving. And tomorrow we go to Tokyo for a little friends retreat. Do you want to add anything?
That's great.
All right, perfect. So let's get into it now that you have a little bit of context of that. So initial probe. We need a new physics. How might we understand our environment better? And as a result, how might we create embodiments towards optimism? I think embodiment is a really, really important thing to grok. One of my favorite industrial designers, Naoto Fukuzawa, kind of talks about embodiment basically as this nature of how we take values and manifest them into products, right? Making our products sort of non-passive but constantly active the same way these chairs sort of afford a direction towards what might be important in the moment, things like hostile architecture of when park benches have, all these kind of dividers that stop certain folks from using it a certain way. These are all sort of a demonstration of values, and they are extremely non-passive. And so why is optimism important? I think optimism is designed and has to be fought for daily. Something I've been thinking a lot about is sort of the nature of these NPC streamers and how unoptimistic it feels. Whether you're walking through Soho and you see Homie like on the corner of Prince and I don't even know where he is, he kind of moves around. But, this idea of an NPC is sort of a dehumanization for attention. I think that's something to work against. And when we kind of take on this responsibility to work against these images that we see as non-optimistic, the hard part is that it has to be more engaging and more fun, right? And that's a tall order. But I think it's an order that folks like y'all have to take on. And I think then the natural thing, becomes like, but everything's burning, right? We can look at global politics and feel that literally everything is burning. We can look at sort of the mental health crisis across America and feel that everything's burning. We can look at the mischief red boots and feel like everything's burning. But again, that sense of really understanding the environment creates these sort of notions of the intuitions that you'll form and sort of embody in your upcoming work. And you can't really give in to doomerism, right? Doomerism sort of compounds and it doesn't really allow for anything generative. There's this book called The Fourth Turning where it kind of talks about like macro cycles of US history. And it goes through like the seasons of like spring, summer, fall, winter. And we are really coming up to the edge, and it probably feels that way when you look around at current events of the fourth turn. And when we turn on this kind of like last thing, we can enter a sort of new spring, which allows for a sense of growth and rebirth, new products, new cultures, new institutions, or we kind of spiral into Dante's Inferno in a type of way. But again, like I pointed out in the beginning, these aren't passive environments. They're environments to be fought for and reshaped. I think humans are kind of terraformers. Stuart Brand has this quote, "We are as God, so we might as well get good at it." Taking on that responsibility allows you to do really, really incredible things. And I think there's always kind of optimism in sort of seeing catastrophes happen around you. In our first ever deck around Eternal, we had this line that the most important movements are birthed from catastrophe. You can look at things like the 2008 financial crisis, and kind of what comes out on the other side of that are companies like Airbnb and Uber, right? The sense of shared resources getting optimized so it didn't depreciate sort of statically. We can kind of look at a lot of things that you may or may not consider catastrophes and see how the intuitions after living through such an event provide sort of new foundations for economic growth, for access to mobility, for medicine. Out of COVID, we had one of the fastest turnarounds of a vaccine. These are all things to be incredibly optimistic around what will come out of these upcoming catastrophes. And so, going through all of that, I was trying to think of like, okay, we have this probe, we have this sort of like ask to not be so doomeristic, to be optimistic, but what does that mean? And I think the new sort of generational physics is this idea of authentic reversal, to sort of slay a hero. Virgil's entire thing was around this sort of laissez-faire, ironic detachment. And I think you can kind of see that in everything millennials make, for better or worse. It's very pre-mediocre. It's a sweet green salad that is probably like $10 too expensive, but like you're told that it's good. And in order to sort of fight against that, very laissez-faire attitude on culture and on production, we have to reinforce authenticity and a sense of attachment, right? Tremaine Emory has this quote that culture is caring. If we have a laissez-faire attitude, we kind of will disassociate from the very cultures that we have no choice but to participate in. And then when we look around and say, why isn't it like this? It's because you didn't make it like that, right? And so I think this new generational physics around authentic reversal kind of provides us, this great symbol that obviously Eternal has embraced with the swirl, but this kind of taking in of the old, transformation into the new. And I also think that's why Luca and I really love DJing. It's putting two old references on both sides and allowing this mixer to provide a new effect into the audience. And then you get that immediate cybernetic loop of that audience reaction. And if the audience reaction isn't there, it's good because you have a USB filled with references. And if the audience reaction is there, you get to enjoy that really special thing that we call a loop. So with this in mind, I'm going to let Luca actually talk about some of the work that we do, because I'm more of the philosophizer and Luca actually gets things done.
Yeah, and so, Reggie and I have meditated on so much of this over the last 5 years, and it's obviously developed as times have changed. And when we started this in 2018, 2019, the world was in a completely different place. And, what's funny is this image was made really early on in Eternal's career, but I think it captures a lot of, what we're trying to say with touching grass and just being present and, optimistic. And I think what I love about this image is, the sort of childlike wonder and sense of community that it captures. And that's something that has, stayed true in Eternal's vision, for the last 5 years. And I think we're always, developing that idea and that thesis with, what comes at us in, the modern day and everything going on in the world. And I think, we like to look back at sort of archival images. I know it's only 5 years, but images that we created at a certain moment in time that maybe tell us, or we're trying to tell us something about the future. And so jumping off of that, when we first developed Eternal's iconography, I think we had a really simple idea in mind, which was just create something that feels sort of fantastic, really simple, but really identifiable, wherever you put it. And in this exercise of sort of, working on this icon and thinking about who our audience was that we were trying to speak to with Eternal's vision, we were able to document the symbol in really unique ways. And I think what it allowed for is for us to see ourselves and the identity of our company in a lot of different ways, while still having some sort of a through line. And it's a little all over the place, but there is sort of a tone that runs through, which is being sort of underground, youthful, having some sort of attitude or opinion, and representing yourself in a sort of unique way. And I think what was really cool about this is that by producing a sort of aesthetic around our symbol, it drew a lot of people into Eternal, and it created this really unique, I would describe as sort of cult-like community, where people started to take this idea and run with it and incorporate the symbol into their imagery and use it as a sense of identity, and a sort of calling out to us, and us sort of responding to that, very much kind of like a bat signal, like the Batman bat signal. I think that ended up showing us a lot, and this was kind of the community that formed, and is incredibly vibrant, incredibly intersectional in terms of the spaces that they occupy, incredibly clashy with the clothes that they wear, and I think that runs true here in Parsons as well. But I think what is really special when we look at images like this, and again reflect on sort of the last 5 years and the community that we've built, is everyone is a hyper individual, right? And everyone represents themselves in a way that is sort of fractured in identity, right? Who I am up here is different than who I am at the office with Reggie, is different than who I am when I'm going to basement on a Friday night, And I think what is so beautiful about that is, Eternal has been able to produce a space and spaces that allow for sort of like fractured identities and intersectional communities to join each other in spaces that they wouldn't normally occupy. And that was really inspiring for us when we were doing like live events. And as Eternal has developed in its thesis, we've leaned a lot into social spaces online, because I think we have just been really disappointed and not satisfied with a lot of the online spaces that we occupy and find community in, right? We were on 2D chat logs in Discord and watching asynchronously on TikTok, and there wasn't a real sense of like interactive community online that felt live and felt vibrant for people like this. And so we took that and we really ran with it, and we started to imagine, this Eternal kid, like what could they look like on the internet if we dreamt it up? And we started really imagining what online identity could look and feel like under Eternal. And it was heavily inspired by the kids that we were meeting and shaking hands with when we were throwing parties. And it also like inspired a lot of the style choices that we made, which were this really incredible way that we were seeing our community represent themselves. And we worked with this designer, Matt Welsh, who is also very much in our community, to sort of like imagine what that could look like. And so these are like the first sort of like test sketches that we did of like what could the sort of like Eternal avatar identity cast look and feel like. And so we started building, and we built like a lot of really incredible virtual spaces that were, fully immersive in a game world. And we learned a lot by just building and trying to reimagine what online spaces could look and feel like, and have them be spatial and three-dimensional and interactive. But as we were developing this world, this Eternal world, with this incredibly vibrant cast of a community, the thing that was missing, I think, was the connection to the real world. And figuring out, it was something that we talked about a lot, is like, we feel like we're a little removed from the real world that we were just celebrating so much. And so, after sort of working together on what that could and should look and feel like, we went back to our values, and culture, media, presence, like those are all things, and community were all things that we felt really deeply about. And culture and media was actually what I studied here. And so I've always taken that with me when developing Eternal. And it was really important to us. And so media became this thing that allowed us to latch onto what was happening in the real world and to still be present. And what we fell in love with that concept was this sense of like hybrid, and the ability to connect what was happening in the real world with online spaces that you could, move around in and engage with and feel an elevated version of, what you were experiencing in the real world. And so we essentially started developing this idea, and we're kind of calling it hybrid live streaming. But the vision of it is really to give audiences and communities a sense of place, a sense of third place, while also allowing for streams of live media to be participated with. And so we started really small, and we worked with friends who were doing live shows, or some of the parties we were doing, we started to live stream that. And we had essentially like two different audiences that were participating in a shared experience together in completely different places, right? We had one audience that was like physical in the real world. They were getting one experience. And then, in the app, we were having people participate in a spatial 3D version of that. And what's awesome about this is that we've seen so many unique things that happen in those spaces that wouldn't normally happen in the real world, where people in different countries are connecting, or people are in completely different areas of the world talking about, really vulnerable things, or things that are really personal that you wouldn't normally go up to someone in a venue and just start talking about. And so what was really special about this is it shed this kind of like layer of a defense system, right? And it allowed people to be extremely expressive and feel really safe doing that. And I think that was something that was like a beautiful surprise for us, as we were building Eternal, was this idea that, some kid maybe in like Oklahoma who doesn't have the opportunity to see Charlie XCX, now has that opportunity and can like find a sense of community there. And this idea of like presence was something that we really wanted to incorporate in something that was social. We didn't want it to be asynchronous. We wanted you to feel like you were there with people. And we also wanted to give those people an experience that they wouldn't normally get otherwise. And so, we're really excited about hybrid live streaming, and it's something that we're developing actively, today. And I think the other thing to note is, 3D has also just completely unlocked so much for us as a medium. It's allowed us to think about relationships online. It's allowed us to think about how do we interact with people in a different way online now. And it's also allowed me to think about the media that we produce and how to create new mediums that wouldn't have existed, 5-10 years ago. And so what you're seeing now is this animated show that we're producing that's about this girl who has a live stream in this fictional world. And we're now able to like actually live stream that show into a virtual world with a virtual audience. And so there's this really unique sort of meta thing happening that is exciting, and we're going to test and we're going to see what happens. And I think leaning into things like this has allowed us to be incredibly excited and optimistic about what the future can look and feel like on the internet, and socially, and like with relationships, which I think is really important, and I think has allowed Eternal to constantly try to push the bounds of which we're allowed to build in. This is really happening, and it's that feeling of this is really happening right now is so important, and like the live element really reinforces the sense of presence, and I think that's something that we need a lot more of on the internet and socially together.
Oh my God, I forgot about this slide. So something that I think is really important when kind of thinking through kind of like these probes of sort of presence, live, how do we embody new sets of values. I also think when thinking about embodying new sets of values, we have to consistently challenge the environments that we find ourselves in. Kind of like was mentioned, I went to Penn, so my sort of like references of companies are very based in like that world of everyone around me going to like Goldman and BCG, and it's a mess. But so I don't really know kind of where Parsons kids tend to jump off into. But I do know there's a lot of really compelling projects that do not have a sort of youth energy kind of driving any sort of challenges to those values, right? And I think something that hopefully feels really clear is Eternal really kind of exists for a sort of a new values sort of mechanism, or a youth values sort of mechanism. So I constantly try to probe myself in thinking about like where are we needed, and what are sort of the unique environments that we're needed. So here are some examples. NASA Project Artemis, which is our project to create a moon base within the next 5 years. They need Parsons kids. Nuclear energy and fission. We need entirely new ideas around how do we create global energy independence. All progress actually is tied to breakthroughs in energy, and we've had this breakthrough sort of kind of destroyed for political reasons. But this is like our path to global sort of energy independence that every nation kind of can take on, which I think unlocks a lot of new sort of cross-cultural opportunities. New hardware. I think it's time for us to be post-Apple. Re-examining nightlife. As you can tell, we care about nightlife a lot, and sort of the cultural exchanges that happen in nightlife. Vertical farming, food independence, local and state government, because without sort of some of these macro systems changing, a lot of things are going to get kind of stuck in the mud. All of these are kind of where we can put embodiments of values. Eternal has just kind of chosen this sort of new internet spatial environment for today. but who knows what tomorrow might be. And so, yeah, this is the final image to wrap it up. You know, I think that I asked Luca kind of right before we left, can you make a Uno reverse card with the Eternal swirl? And he's like, you suck. But he got it done. So yeah, you know, I think this idea of sort of authentic reversal, you know, the idea that the internet can be predominantly a space for live interaction, I think is more subversive than we think. If you think about social internet today, it is all algorithmically driven. It is all asynchronous, solo player, consumption heavy. The enemy of these platforms is literally your sleep. And to go up against that with a new set of values is not only challenging, but I think worthwhile of our time. And I think you have a lot of values that are worthwhile of a lot of our times. So, thank you. For sure.
Can you all hear me? I'm gonna start us with a question because I was making some notes and I was like, oh, I want to ask more about this. So, quick question: how did you sort of come together as a collaboration? Like, can you maybe speak to like what that looks like? Or I imagine we have a lot of students in the room who are kind of working right now as friends, but then thinking about perhaps, once they live here, they could be collaborators. Could you maybe speak to how it was birthed, let's say?
Either one.
Yeah, I mean, I think our story is interesting. So originally I started Eternal 5 years ago on my own and had no idea how to do anything. I was working in film and was just really kind of getting exhausted by the medium and was getting exhausted by the sort of industry I was in, which was kind of like commercial fashion work. And I had started Eternal as this sort of risk and a chance at, you know, trying something new. And I had basically been working on my own for like a year and got to a point where my bank account was like negative like $400.
That's real.
Yeah, and was essentially just like hopeless. And I had a friend who had started his own company, and I had a call with him one day, and was kind of asking him for advice, and you know, he randomly was like, "Oh, maybe you should talk to a psychic. I have one," and he's like incredible. And so, you know, as my sort of last hope, I was like, whatever, sure, I'll try that.
Yes.
And you know, spent my last like $50 for like a 30-minute session
Gotta
with
do
this
it.
guy. And in that session, he like very specifically told me like, there's this guy who you've never met before. His name starts with an R, and this girl who you've never met before either is going to introduce you, and you're going to be with him for the rest of your life, making this thing.
Oh wow, that's so nice.
Yeah, but I mean, I had no idea what he was talking about, so it was, you know, just kind of forgot about it and was kind of in this process of kind of giving up. And then one day, sure enough, Cami, who's our friend, connected us, and his name was Reggie, and you know, I was, you know, completely shocked. And so I called him. I was like, "Hey, you're not going to believe this, but this is meant to be." And I was like, "Could you come fly out to LA," which is where I was living at the time, just like sleep on my couch for a week, and can we just talk?
Wow.
And
And,
so-
and again, you didn't know each other. Like,
No.
you're just like, come sleep on this couch. Okay, cool,
Yeah,
cool, cool.
and so, you know,
cool.
he had to take a chance on me,
Okay.
right? But I was very, you know, persuasive, and this story, you know, was legit. And yeah, spent another like $200-something that I didn't have to fly him out. He slept
Wow.
on my couch for a week, and we just became best friends. And like, that is the story.
That is so
Yeah,
amazing.
And, yeah, it was special, and I think we bonded over a lot of things, but we had a really shared vision of, you know, what we were not happy about with the internet and what we were not happy about with, you know, the state of social media and how kids weren't feeling good about themselves, and, you know, how identity needs to change online, and, you know, maybe we can reimagine that together. And so he really, you know, inspired me. And as you can tell from this talk, you know, he has an insanely like philosophical view of technology and, you know, the internet. And I came in with this sort of like commercial visual lens on everything. And I think that pairing allowed for a lot of really great ideas to come to life and, you know, to be seen. And so, yeah, that's our relationship.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, no notes.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
So you mentioned right at the very end that the future of the internet is spatial and live. And immediately I thought of the concept of the metaverse, and that's quite a loaded term these days, and many people are maybe not a fan of that word, but I felt that was apt, like, you know, an apt description of kind of what you were describing. So I'm curious how you relate to that term, either personally or, you know, from a company perspective.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay. So metaverse is a loaded term, right? So let's kind of like just go back into like that term. So it starts really with Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. This book was written in, I think, like 92, maybe. And it's really, or 88? Anyway, and it basically is the first book that really talks about virtual worlds from like a VR perspective. I think the reason that term got so loaded is because there's a general sort of disliking of like Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook. They went through the entire rebrand. I don't think that's like a valid reason to not like the term.
Sure.
So then we have to start asking ourselves kind of like what's next for technology, particularly for like new internet / post-internet. So I break it into two categories. There's new containers for software, and then there's what software is becoming. New containers would equal hardware and spatial. Spatial is kind of where we get the metaverse term, but hardware will enable spatial in new ways, AR, VR, what have you. And then there's what software is becoming. That's AI and that's crypto, Web3, right? AI is literally condensing the internet to a really dense ball through large language models, which has all these parameters and then can shoot out media on command. And soon it won't even need commands. It'll just have motivations like we have motivations and intents. And then there's Web3, which is sort of, you know, permissionless, public, trusted databases that can execute things. I think the metaverse is going to be really interesting. I think like anything else, whenever we expand technology, we expand it in both directions, both the sacred and the profane. There will be sacred parts of the metaverse that feel like church, and there will be profane parts which will take the worst of internet porn and make it physically felt as you have a haptic suit. And we'll have to reckon with both of those things.
Nice ending.
Any other questions? I'll be floating around too.
Hi. Okay, so what advice would you give yourself, like, maybe 10 years ago, or like when you were just graduating and trying to like figure everything out? Because I feel like in my case, maybe I'm just like struggling to find like my personal identity and how to like showcase my skills or like my vision when it doesn't always apply to everyone, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, everyone has to go through that, right? Like when I was working in film, there was, you know, I was incredibly frustrated because I felt like the space that I was in, you know, wasn't true to a lot of my values. Mm-hmm. And, you know, obviously I had to take some form of a risk to try something out. I didn't know what that was going to look or feel like, you know, for the next 5-10 years. I had no idea that I was going to meet this guy. And, yeah, I think what's interesting about that experience, just speaking personally, was there was an insane amount of unknown in every day, basically, you know. And when I was running out of money and had, you know, a negative bank account, that just kept feeling more and more intense. Mm-hmm. And, you know, obviously we had like a unique sort of divine intervention moment, but I think even in our work history, working together and, you know, trying things out and failing a lot, we were always critical of the moment in time that we were in. We were always critical and communicated a lot about how we felt, which I think was something that Reggie pulled out of me that I didn't have as a tool previously. Was like I wasn't able to really like say how I felt about stuff. I just kind of like made stuff to try to get that out. And so, yeah, I think like the thing that I took away from our experience over the last sort of like 5 years, and maybe even the last 10 years of just like how I've changed, what has been just like learning how to talk about your feelings more, getting those ideas out and, you know, creating things with them, and yeah, failing a lot. Like, I think we had to try a lot of things that failed terribly, a lot. And even today, like we failed on stuff today, you know, that we walking over here talked about, you know, being really upset with. And I think now we've gotten to a point of like, obviously we have each other as a support system, but like really embracing those moments, because I think those are the moments where something comes out on the other side that you wouldn't have expected. And yeah, I think, yeah, we try to take a lot of risks, and we try to have really strong opinions. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think one thing to add to that, just on like you know, thinking about myself about to graduate, as you could imagine, again, like the Wharton track is like very linear, right? So like one thing I always remember is just like comparison is the thief of joy. Like you're going to see friends go seemingly so much faster than you, and you're going to think like, why isn't my career moving that fast? Why haven't I been like tapped for said thing? Don't like have horse blinders on, because you know maybe you're not working hard, but you know, don't also like think that that's the Bible or that's how like your path is supposed to go. Like our journey is a journey of like extreme non-linearity. So comparison is the thief of joy. Then before you can produce for anyone else, you have to learn how to produce for yourself. If there's like one thing I learned from Luca, although I appreciate what he said that I helped him talk about his feelings, he also taught me how to produce my feelings and put it into something that isn't just kind of like 30 minutes of me talking the way I started this talk, right? So produce for yourself and publish for yourself. We like, the one thing that the internet is good for right now is publishing for yourself and garnering kind of like that public sort of portfolio, right? I'm sure you guys talk about portfolio construction all the time, but you know, that was such an abstract concept for me coming out of like the Wharton kind of school of thought. And so, yeah, those are just like a couple add-ons from there.
Hey guys.
What's up, doggy?
Do you guys have any plans or any thoughts about developing your own hardware to act as a certain container for the software that you have built in the future?
Yes. So to be like less cryptic. So I think hardware becomes really interesting. So I did a talk that was not recorded recently, just called New Hardware, and using a very, again, Stewart brand model of pace layering. I believe hardware embeds itself into the nature layer, which is, you know, upstream of all of our other things, culture, governance, what have you. So hardware is incredibly important to how we think about sort of, you know, commerce, identity. I think in order to produce differentiated hardware today, you need to be so keenly ready for a 30+ year journey. It's very easy to forget how old Apple is. Apple was founded in like 70 something, right? The Macintosh, which came out in '84, was a commercial failure. And then Steve gets kicked out, has to go through a whole redemption arc at like Next and Pixar. He comes back in the 90s. Apple's about to literally financially collapse. Long story short, like he cuts like all the product line. There's only 4 products left. This is the 90s now. And then we get to like the clamshell and like the clear, you know, translucent blue Mac. So now that's like what, 98? So that's already, we haven't even gotten to the iPod yet, and that's 20 years of corporate intuition building, right? And this is why intuitions are so key, and this is also why we have to like be post Apple, because the people running that are not running off of like intuitions that we're building today that will help take us into the next 50 years. So yes, I would love for Eternal to build hardware. I don't think we've built even the software intuitions quite yet to know what our needs would be from a hardware layer. Although if I had to guess, it would be turning the Eternal chain into some sort of AI kind of companion assistant type beat.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi there. I want to say congratulations first on the progression you guys have made for like creating this online domain so far. But what I would like to know is how and what the process looked like for you when it came to starting out and finding investors for your vision as well as like the funding.
Yeah. So the okay, so remember how Luke was like, yeah, I had negative like bank account dollars. Well, guess who he brought in while having a negative bank account? That was a fun moment of realization. But so essentially, part of my background further, I designed my own major at Wharton around behavioral design and venture capital. I brought Rough Draft Ventures, which was part of General Catalyst, or is still part of General Catalyst, which is a large venture fund, to Penn, and basically like hounded one of the partners for an entire summer that I needed to be the first student partner at Penn. So that created a bit of a basis for like my venture network. Fast forward to Luca and I working on this. I was writing is very big in the capital community, particularly for early stage startups. Obviously, design and engineering is also big, but my design work is not as good as Luca's, and I don't code. So I was writing. I was writing a lot about what we thought Eternal would become, and that was laying a sort of narrative framework for when we went out to San Francisco. And then we went out to San Francisco and pitched the metaverse, literally, in January 2019, and got laughed out of the room because they didn't think it was a real thing. Remember, this is pre-COVID, this is pre-Facebook turning into Meta, but we got laughed out of the room. So we went back home, tail between our legs, still no money, and I called one investor who had kind of watched me since college, and I was funded out of college as well to like do a thing, and it didn't work out. Anyway, we go back to San Francisco, we raise like half of the round that we're trying to raise, then the lead dropped out, and it's 4th of July. Now, if you don't know anything about venture investing, basically no VC works in July. So that round falls apart. Now we're completely out of money, we can't pay rent, and the one angel investor we had literally paid our rent on like a loan. And he was like, I don't expect to see this, but at least, you won't get evicted. So now Luca and I are like, okay, we have like a couple $100. We've gone through a lot of money. We've gone through like bad prototypes because we're not good at what we're doing, maybe still. And we build this little prototype of a little jelly character. All the while, we're still writing. We're still being very public and enthusiastic. You're putting on your game face for the capital crowd. And we get this little jelly character on a map, and we sort of have a little bit of a moment where we're like, oh, it's this with friends with voice chat. And it kind of has a sort of networked Animal Crossing vibes. And we just started rebuilding the entire pitch again. And it was, cleaner, and the narratives were cleaner. But it took quite literally, I would say 4 full fundraising attempts and failures. And there's nothing more demoralizing than like getting on a flight that you can't pay for to go back to an apartment that you can't pay for. but it's also so energizing as I scream into like a brick wall. But that's the honest truth of the journey, you know. And yeah, when we started raising again, now it's September 2019, and we put together, you know, we get half the round filled again. Right, typically what happens is like a lead will join, and then you get all the supporting checks, or you get all these supporting checks to convince a lead to join. So we were taking the gain supporting checks to convince a lead to join route, because, you know, that's just what we're doing. And an investor is like, okay, like let's have this final meeting in San Francisco. And we're like, that's great, but we can't afford to go to San Francisco. So they like flew us out. And Ginger had just come out by Brockhampton, and we had the pitch meeting. I thought it went terribly. Luca was like, that was your best one yet. He has to go back home to LA because our flights were booked at different times. I'm in the hotel just like crying. And then I get a call from the investor, and they're like, can you come back in? I was just like, fuck, Luca's gone. Oh God. And so I go back, and they like slide us the term sheet, and that kind of like kicked off the eternal story, you know? And then I listened to Ginger and like cried walking around San Francisco. But again, like let's just, again, back to like environment to intuition forming. Like that was an environment of just like 4 attempts and 4 failures and more into the round happening, right? And all of those changed the deck, changed the prototypes, changed the design language, changed what we were communicating and how. And that led to so much for us to fail all over again when we got resources. But that's kind of the initial story. And I think to my point on like self-publishing, everyone is much closer than you think, you know, and sending people your work. There's a lot of protectivism around your work. I think you just kind of have to be, you know, very comfortable, at least with a capital class, because it's not like they make anything, you know, sending them that style of work. If investment and like venture is a route that you're interested in. It's a very nuanced thing. There's a lot of like games that get played, but yeah, if that's an interest to you, you know, I'm happy to meet up and talk about it.
I kind of want to dig in. This is me over here. I moved.
Oh, sorry.
I know, I was over there and I moved back. I want to take a little bit out of what you're saying, kind of thinking about, because we have students that are across our CD program, sophomores, juniors, seniors, and thinking about the tangible skills, right, that they're learning now, or even just, no, Reggie, I feel like you're still in this too. But no, just like thinking about what it means to write about your work, what it means to create a concept or a vision, even just, I think you were saying visioning. I think it's so super critical for creatives to really understand how to articulate what they're doing, and then to go into the world and then to say, hey, here's this project, give us money, right? Or whatever the case may be. But I do think like the skills of that, right? Like how important would you say is thinking about the concepts of writing, concepts of putting together a presentation, but also like what does that look like? Like what possibly, like even in school, thinking about the ways in which we're sort of navigating those aspects. How does that serve you now in this moment as you're kind of working in the industry and sort of developing your practice?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, what's funny is like, you know, going to Lang and studying culture and media, like going into a venture meeting was like never in my cards, you know. I never thought that was a place that I would be. And in fact, like I would go to those meetings in like a beanie and like a torn up t-shirt and like, you know, we'd get, you know, looked at really funny, you know, but that was just who I was. And, you know, this was a new foreign space that I was occupying. And, you know, I think the one thing that being at the New School taught me was, you know, how to have really great taste and how to curate really well and how to take ideas and turn them into visuals. And, you know, one thing that I think we're still really proud of is like our fundraising decks that we would send out in the very early days of Eternal were probably some of the most unique decks that these investors had ever seen because, you had a new school kid making them. And I think that was something that really differentiated us and I think kept us in people's minds more than the average kid going out and fundraising. And that was something that, proudly we would not have had I not been here, and studying the way that I was. And so I think that's something that we've developed a system together because Reggie's like an incredible writer. He's incredible at, building these philosophies and building narratives around them. And then I can translate that and make it really beautiful fucking deck, And I think that's something that, we now try to incorporate in a lot of aspects of our business, right? When we have our board meetings in front of our board, and Reggie dumps text onto a bunch of slides, and when I read through it, I'm like, I don't feel anything when I read this, maybe we can work on this and make people feel something when they look at, our thoughts. That conversation between a Wharton kid and a New School kid, created something really magical for us, and it worked for us. And so, just talking about skill sets, like I understood where my weaknesses were, and I also understood, where I could really help, and observing the landscape that was, what fundraising was in San Francisco in 2019, like I could tell that there was something missing there, and it was like an artistic vision on startups, and I think that was our relationship.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know if you have anything.
I think that was great.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I have a question. Can you plug your psychic?
Yeah. Yeah, he's really busy now because he's so good.
Bet.
Yeah. I told everyone that story, and now he just gets booked every day.
You can
I can't
share
book
it
him.
later.
Yeah.
That's fine. All right. Any other questions? No. Oh, we have one back there.
Oh, you want me to? You got it. Where's the hand? Oh, here. Okay.
Hi. I don't go to this school and I'm not in the design world, but just out of personal curiosity, what would you recommend to someone who is trying to kind of like bridge different worlds? And I don't know, I guess for more context, I'm a rock climber, but also do have interest in the creative world and art and bringing culture in. But I always have this like feeling of trying to feel more confident in my identity, but then like in the process of merging those worlds, it's like you have to part with one part of my past identity, and I have a lot of trouble with gaining confidence to do what hasn't been done before. And I was just wondering, like, with all of this like revolutionary work that you're doing, like if you have any advice in believing in yourself that it's possible.
Go for it.
Yeah, I think that's really real. Okay, this is like a big question, so I'm trying to like make it answer concise and not like another lecture. Okay, so I think that there's a sort of comfort that eventually you will build in a sense of like persistent transformation. I think transformation is one of the most like human things because it's sort of anchored in redemption, and we all need redemption, right? We all will fall short in some form, and we'll have to kind of like reach for the next thing. And there's this idea within cybernetics called a referential object. I might have made it up, but I'm pretty sure it's within cybernetics. And so when thinking about sort of how do we build sort of new intersections of work that might not have intersections, I think taking the idea of embodiment and finding what a referential object might look like for you to strive towards will kind of help a persistent sense of transformation. So to make that like really, really tangible, I'll just use like a pretty basic example. Like in Christianity, the referential object would be the cross, right? The cross represents like salvation. So every time you're trying to kind of like understand who you are in like the physical world. There's this object that reminds you of the spiritual world, and you like work towards what that image represents. So for you and like rock climbing and some other things, like finding what that object is, maybe it's some peak, right? It's some plateau that like you reach. What is like the transformative effect that happens on that climb? And then what are the intersections of things that might represent what that climb is, right? That's like a constant transformative figure, because there's always another peak. There's always some like motion that's to be had. In the same way that I hope you feel empowered when you're rock climbing, you'll start to be able to kind of like bridge those moments across all of the intersectionality that maybe you're striving for. I don't know if that was too abstract, but that's off the dome.
Thank you. I think we are good.
Yeah.
Round of applause one more time. Okay.